Africa. What you've not been told about Africa itself and the Congo. Africa, one of the, we'll move forward. Let me make sure I do this right. Okay, why is Africa the heart of the world? Some of you may have studied, see that Africa is the cradle of humanity, right? Modern humans came out of the African continent and migrated throughout the world. Africa, I was listening to, watching the presidential debates with the Republican Party, and Rick Santorum said, Africa sets up Africa as a country. Africa is a continent. Yes. Not a country, right? And you can see United States, India, Argentina, Western Europe, China, all can fit in the continent itself. So it's a large continent. The world's second largest continent with an estimated 1 billion people, 54 countries, some 2,000 languages, and Africa, as we see at the bottom, is a continent and not a country. We move on. The Africa you know. None of you mentioned poverty or child soldiers, but Africa is usually presented in a pathological fashion. That is to say, when you encounter Africa, it's usually about famine, about war, savagery, child soldiers. Those of you who read in the English class and read The Heart of Darkness, you know what I'm talking about, right? That's where the moniker comes from for the African continent. They call it what? The Heart of Darkness, and that comes straight out of the novel that you've read in your English class. So we're going to deal with how we view Africa, the prism through which we look at the continent, and how that affects policies, how that affects how we engage Africans, how that affects how we engage the continent as a whole. So this is Africa that you may not know. We see skyscrapers in Mozambique, in South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Abidjan. So the point is that on the African continent, you can find amenities like you find here. You can find modernity. It's not all jungle or all mud huts. Okay, current struggle for the African continent. Africa is endowed with enormous and spectacular natural resources. You've mentioned some of it before. We talked about copper and gold and diamonds, you name it. The African continent has it. Now, the key thing about these resources is that they are vital to the functioning of modern industries, right? So those resources that are on the African continent, they represent potential for how we live in the West, and increasingly how people live in the East as well. It says, at the present time, the scramble continues without plundering of its resources. Now, for those, we can move on to the next one. Raw materials and resources lead to a Western interest in Africa. The fact of the matter is, the resources that we find on the African continent, they have enough resources in order to sustain themselves throughout the continent. In fact, truth be told, Africa, or the West, needs Africa more than Africa needs the West. I'm going to say that again. The West needs Africa more than Africa needs the West. We usually present it with a picture of Africa being needy and having to gain outside help, as opposed to outsiders coming to capture what Africa has for their own benefit. Now, if Africa is so rich, how did it become so poor? Here we start off with some of the original natural resources coming out of the African continent to support the West, in the form of human beings, the transatlantic slave trade. But we fast forward from the slave trade a bit. We're going to focus on the colonial era. And this is where we start to deal with the idea, or not even the idea, the period of imperialism and colonialism. Now, if you want to look at the modern history of Africa and the Congo itself, and Congo in particular, in 1884 and 1885, you had European nations gathering in Berlin. And they were gathering in Berlin for a reason. You had European countries that were expanding, capturing resources and territory that they can use for the benefit of Europe. And in this expansion, what they would do is fight against each other in order to capture particular land on the African continent. And two excellent books for you to read to get a sense of what was taking place at the time is The Scramble for Africa by Thomas Pakenham. And there's a second book called The Race to Fashada by David Levering-Lewis. But in any case, in order to tamp down, or in order to halt the fight against European nations for control of this great pie, the African continent, there was a conference held in Berlin in 1884-1885, where spheres of influence were established among European nations. If you look on the African continent today, you'll see that in some areas people speak what? Portuguese, right? Like Angola and Mozambique. What that means is that the Portuguese captured that territory. That's a territory that they got coming out of the Berlin Conference. In other areas, you have people speaking French, like in Congo-Brazzaville or in Ivory Coast. That means that the French had control of those French-speaking areas. You have English, you even have German, you have Spanish. So you had these European nations carving up the African continent. That's where we get the 54 countries that we see today. The big prize at the time, was Congo itself. Congo is located in the heart of Africa. In order for the European nations not to fight over the Congo, they gave it to King Leopold II of Belgium as his own personal property. It wasn't a colony. He owned everything. He owned the people, he owned the water, the land, the air, you name it, he owned it. And they called that the Congo Free State. From 1885 to 1908, the king had possession of the Congo. And during that period, he extracted rubber and ivory for the benefit of Belgium. All right? And that same period, that 23-year period, an estimated 10 to 15 million Congolese lost their lives, right? As a result of the extraction of the natural resources. So you have a situation where Congo was caught in the midst of a geostrategic battle to control those resources. And since that period, the Congolese have been striving, and this is really important, to control and determine their own affairs. The central struggle of the Congolese in that period to the present is to control and determine their own affairs. Remember, 1885 to 1908, they were owned by the king, so they didn't control their own affairs. As a result of the brutalities committed by the King Leopold II in the Congo, you had an international outcry. You had people like Mark Twain. Everybody knows Mark Twain, right? Mark Twain, especially English students, he wrote a book called King Leopold's Soliloquy, right? You have the book The Heart of Darkness being written. So you had a number of individuals, institutions fighting to expose what the king was doing in the Congo. And as a result of that, the king had to give up the Congo. So he turned it over to the Belgian state in 1908, right? As a result of international pressure. Now notice what I said. He turned it over to where? The Belgian state, right? The Congo did not go back to Congolese. So here it is, 1908, Congolese still fighting to control and determine their own affairs. So, from 1908 to 1960, Belgium ruled Congo as a colonial outpost. 1908 to 1960. Some of you mentioned the resources that are there. During that period, the Belgians, remember from 1885 to 1908, it was what, rubber and ivory that came out, right, of the Congo. 1908 to 1960, the Belgians exploited the copper and the cobalt. And it also provided to its ally, the United States, uranium. Why did the United States need that uranium? For what? Manhattan Project. The bomb that was dropped on August dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the uranium used for those bombs came out of where? The Congo, primarily. Some also came out of Canada, but the best quality, the largest quantity, came out of the Congo. So here it is that Congo is being exploited for its natural resources. Now, in 1960, the Congolese finally gained independence, right? And they elected a leader of their choice, a leader that they felt was going to best represent them in controlling and determining their own affairs. That leader's name was Patrice Lumumba. He took office on June 30th, 1960, and he made a famous speech. And the essence of the speech was to criticize the brutality of Belgian rule over Congo since 1885. And also to state unequivocally and boldly that Congolese now have control of those riches, the copper and the cobalt and the uranium and the rubber. And they're going to utilize those riches for the benefit of the Congo, right? Now that didn't sit well with the former colonial masters. Because what? They wanted to still have access to those riches to benefit Europe. So as a result of Lumumba's declaration, within weeks he was deposed, removed from office. And there's an excellent book that you can look at. It was written by the CIA Chief of Station in the Congo at the time, Larry Devlin. It's called Chief of Station Congo. And it's basically a blueprint for overthrowing a democratically elected government of Patrice Lumumba. So after the overthrow, within months, Lumumba was finally assassinated. He was assassinated on January 17, 1961. Now what that assassination did is one of the most significant assassinations in the 20th century. Because not only did it set back the Congo, but it also set back Africa as a whole. Because Congo itself is located in the heart of the African continent. Like, if you look at the map here, it's located in the heart of the African continent, right? It is bordered by 9 other countries. It's the size of Western Europe. Today it's one of the largest countries in the world with a population of nearly 70 million people. It's really the fulcrum, right, on which the African continent swings. It's the fulcrum on which the African continent swings. So, that assassination in 1961 of Patrice Lumumba did not only have an impact on the Congolese people and their destiny, but also an impact on the African continent as a whole. And we're going to get into that a little more. Just move through a few of these. I think I may have skipped this back. But to demonstrate the importance of the Congo itself, President Obama says that if Africa is to achieve its promise, resolving the problem in the Congo will be critical. Thabo Mbeki, the former president of South Africa, he just flatly stated, there is no new Africa without a new Congo. So that's how significant the Congo is. And even the CIA Chief of Station, Larry Devlin, talking about the overthrow of Lumumba, he justified the overthrow of Lumumba by stating that if we did not overthrow Lumumba, we may have lost the African continent, not the Congo, but the African continent, to the Russians, or the Soviet Union, because it was at the height of the Cold War when Lumumba was deposed. And that was the rationale by the United States for deposing Lumumba. So, Lumumba was assassinated in '61. What happened next was that the United States and Western Allies imposed a dictator by the name of Joseph Desiree Mobutu on the Congolese people for not 4 years, which is the length of one U.S. president's term, not 8 years, 2 terms, but over 3 decades. Over 3 decades. Every time the Congolese people rose up to get rid of this dictator, the U.S. and their allies would come in and crush the rebellions. So here it is, we see the struggle on the part of the Congolese people under King Leopold II, trying to determine their own affairs. Lost 10 to 15 million people. under Belgian colonialism for 52 years, 1908 to 1960, still trying to determine their own affairs. There's a Congolese hero by the name of Simon Kimbangu. Spent more years in prison than Nelson Mandela resisting Belgian colonialism from 1921 to 1951. So we have these people trying to take control of their country. They finally elected their own leader in 1960, and they said, yes, we're going to control our resources, control our country, and utilize it for our own benefit. And what happens? The leader that they elected was what? Assassinated. Not even a year he spent in office. Months he was assassinated. And then a dictator put over the Congolese people for 3 decades. In the late 1990s, 1996, 1997, we see that the Congo was invaded from the east by Rwanda and Uganda. Congolese people thought that, okay, maybe here we have a chance again to liberate ourselves. But the Rwandans and Ugandans actually imposed a leader on the Congolese people again. And that leader is has the name Laurent Desire Kabila. And that invasion, what an invasion did, the 96 invasion and the imposition of Kabila, was it triggered mass murders in the Congo. Estimated 6 million people lost their lives as a result of that invasion. From 1996 to the present, and the numbers are still going, an estimated 6 million people lost their lives. And the Congolese still haven't fully been able to control their own affairs. Now, in 2002, we have a situation where the war ended, officially. The war ended, but the conflict continued. Rwanda and Uganda withdrew from the Congo. There's a transition period set up to establish elections. Elections took place in 2006, and Congo elected Joseph Desire Kabila as their leader. And Kabila led Congo from 1996 to 2011. Under his leadership, Congo wound up at the end of the Human Development Index. That means everything you can, all 187 countries, in terms of development, Congo is at the bottom at 187 out of 187. So in 2011, the Congolese had another election, 5 years in office of Joseph Kabila. And they were ready to get rid of Kabila. But what did he do? He cheated. He rigged the elections and claimed himself as the victor again to rule for another 5 years. So that's the situation that Congo is in right now, where the Congolese people are trying to get rid of this leader who has not served their interests, a leader that's supported from the outside by other African countries, by Western nations, and that's a struggle that they're going through right now to try and remove this oppressive regime from them so that they can actually control their country, determine their own affairs, and have their country serve the interests of the people as opposed to serving external interests. So we're going to leave it right there for now. I know how much time do I have?
What time is it over? 15 minutes.
Okay, so we're going to leave it there for now and open it up for questions. I brought you the history of the Congo, what's taking place right now, and we'll open up for any questions that you may have and elaborate on the third part that I shared with you, how you can be engaged around the social movement that's taking place in the Congo. I don't know if you had anybody have a question? Yes.
Do you believe that most of Congo's problems right now, especially political instability, is due to the influence and, I guess, interference of foreign powers?
Well, thanks for the question. Congo has two problems or challenges, two broad challenges. One is internal, and the second is external. And the internal challenge that Congo has is that it lacks organizational deficiency. Like the organizations are not strong enough to really protect the interests of the Congolese people. And the reason why the organizations are weak is because of what I just shared with you, because of wars, invasions, dictatorships, assassinations. All that is work to weaken the institutions, so they're not able to fully protect themselves. They also face a challenge of external intervention. Because of where it's located in the heart of Africa, because of the wealth that it has with the diamonds and the gold and the copper and the coltan, you name it, they have it. You have a lot of interest vying to control it. And you have neighboring governments, such as Rwanda and Uganda, that's in the east. Rwanda and Uganda are small countries right here in the east of Congo, vying to control it. So that's external intervention that they have to be concerned about. You have foreign governments like the United States that played a role in the overthrow and the assassination of Congo's first elected leader. You also have multinational corporations. Multinational corporations and mining companies, they need access to those resources in order to power the industries. The cobalt in the Congo is key for the batteries in your cell phones. The cobalt in the Congo is necessary for the color television. The military, the aerospace industry need the cobalt. The copper that they have there is key for the automotive industry. The copper wiring in the industry, the copper in your homes. So that's important to the West. The coltan. Coltan is a mineral that once it's refined and processed, it does two things. It maintains an electric charge and is heat resistant. And that means it allows technology companies to make devices that are smaller in size. And so you'll find coltan in your cell phones. Anybody play video games? Xbox? Xbox? Show those hands. Coltan in your Xbox. Nintendo Wii?
On my radio.
Nintendo. PlayStation, Sony PlayStation. Coltan is in there. So almost every electronic device, or Americans have at least one electronic device in which coltan is found. So you have the corporations that want to get access to those valuable minerals. You also have humanitarian industry. That's a challenge for the Congo as well. Although they come in to help, there is not an exit plan. So they benefit from Congo being impoverished and dependent. So those are the two challenges. Internal, in terms of organizational weakness, and external, in terms of foreign governments, neighboring countries, multinational corporations wanting to benefit from Congo's riches.
Can I ask a follow-up
Sure.
question to this? So you described Congo, and it seems it is very essential to the fundamental interest of industrialized nations and capitalism. So how do you, because it's so essential to industrialized nations, I guess that's why there is so much foreign manipulation and interference. So how do you think this can stop? Because as we know from history, nations will stop at nothing to get what they want. So do you have any suggestions of how this can stop?
Sure. And that's that's where you come in, and other people who have joined us around the world. A lot of this that has happened in the Congo has happened in the darkness, has happened in silence, right? There hasn't been much light shined on it. So when something happens in the dark, not much light shine on it, there's not much accountability, right? So on the outside, what we can do to help prevent or forestall the external intervention is to put pressure on our corporations and put pressure on our governments, right? The U.S. foreign policy, for example, has consistently supported strong men in the Congo. Why? Because the strong men provide access to the resources and usually work in the interests of external forces as opposed to the interests of the people. So, for example, in U.S. Congress, there is a bill that was passed by President Obama when he was senator. And that bill is now law, calls on the United States not to support strong men in the Congo or in the region. Men that are going to dominate the people, provide access to the resources. So we mobilize people to call on the State Department to implement that law in an effort to prevent the U.S. from intervening in the Congo on the wrong side, on the side of profit, on the side of corporations, on the side of strong men, as opposed to on the side of the people, on the side of democracy, on the side of diplomacy, on the side of politics and not war. So those are the ways in which we look to put pressure on the outside. On the inside, we have young people who are clear about the geostrategic significance of the country. So they're organizing themselves throughout the country to educate other young people and to educate their communities and to bring about social change so that you have strong local institutions. And we're working with them. We send them equipment like cell phones, laptops, digital cameras. All those are tools that they utilize in order to bring about social change in the country. Much like you see what has transpired in Tunisia and Egypt, you have Congolese youth who are working to bring about that kind of social, broad social change as well. So on the outside, we can help by holding our corporations and government accountable, and we can also help by providing support to groups on the ground. So that's how we plan to address the strong interest that we find in the Congo. Does that fully answer your question? Okay, yes?
So do you think that the Congo is a good example of the drawn-out effects of imperialism? Like, are there other nations that are suffering a similar way, like weak institutions?
Congo is probably the quintessential example, primarily because of the number of lives lost, right? From 1885 to 1908, they lost 10 to 15 million people. From 1996 to the present, estimated 6 million lives have been lost. It's a country that's, for all intents and purposes, on the tutelage, where the people do not control their own affairs. The affairs of the Congo are determined from the outside. For example, the mining laws that determine how Congo sells its minerals is written by the World Bank. The forestry laws that determines how Congo's forest is governed, it's written by the World Bank here in Washington. So you have a situation where the people are not in full control of the affairs of the country. So for those reasons and many other reasons, I think it is the quintessential example, certainly on the African continent, and probably in the world, because of the lives that have been lost in the Congo as a result of imperial encroachment. I saw a young person with your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, do you frequently go to the Congo? I mean,
yeah, we go on a regular basis. We have people who come, and we organize trips to the Congo on a consistent basis. We take journalists, we take religious figures, students, university students, so they can see what the work that the young people are doing on the ground, or women's groups are doing. This summer, we're taking a group of hip-hop artists to the Congo. So as you know, hip-hop is a tool for social change. If it's used, it can be used in that fashion. So we're taking hip-hop artists to the Congo this summer.
Also, what's your guys' relationship with like the IMF and like the World Bank? Because I know that they're pretty prominent in Congo. Do you guys? I imagine you guys do have an official view of them. Do you work with them? Do you work against them?
Ultimately, it's the Congolese who are going to control and determine their own affairs. If you were to look at the record of the World Bank in the Congo, it's not a record that Congolese would embrace. So the rationale for embracing the World Bank doesn't exist, especially among the young people when they look at what has transpired in their country for certainly the last 50 years and the involvement of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. I'll give you an example of how that's played out. I mentioned about the laws, the mining laws and the forestry laws being written here. International Monetary Fund, for those of you who, I suspect most of you are familiar, is an institution that regulates financing on a global scale and provides loans to governments so that they can operate. And it taps into your question about imperialism as well. Congo established a deal with the Chinese, a mineral for infrastructure swap. The Chinese would get copper and cobalt for their burgeoning industry, and the Congolese would get roads and hospitals, clinics, you name it. $9 billion deal. The International Monetary Fund didn't take kindly to the deal, or the United States didn't, so they told the Congolese that you have to renegotiate this deal. Now, it's the Congolese government that is establishing this deal as a sovereign nation. So here it is, you have a multilateral institution coming in and telling them you have to renegotiate. So can you imagine America establishing a deal with another country and then IMF comes in and says, hey, Barack Obama, you can't do this, right? You need to renegotiate a deal. So the Congolese had to concede and renegotiate the deal. So there's no one that can work in the interests like the Congolese can, in their own best interests. So the IMF and the World Bank, their history has been to work against the interests of the Congolese people. That's the record. That's the unfortunate record. So young people are not inclined to, or the youth of Congo are not inclined to support programs by the World Bank. They don't see it as a way for bringing themselves out of dependency and bringing themselves out of impoverishment. And you have to understand, Congo has tremendous potential. The Congo River itself, if it's properly dammed, it can provide electricity for the entire African continent. I have some left over for Southern Europe and even some for the Middle East. And as you know, electricity is central to the industrialization of countries. So that's how key Congo is. It has an agricultural sector. We talk about the minerals, but even agriculture. If Congo's agricultural capacity is fully realized, it can feed the entire world through 2050, when the world's population will be 9 billion. It's a part of the second largest rainforest in the world. So it's vital to the fight against climate change. So these are some of the things that are at stake in the Congo and why you have such external intervention. It's a remarkably valuable piece of real estate. Yes?
Yeah, just sort of. So earlier you were talking about how a lot of the Congolese youth were looking up north, they were looking to the Middle East for inspiration because they want more. And I see that you have a very optimistic view of it. Do you potentially maybe see a lot of that energy maybe going towards maybe resparking conflicts in the Congo? Do you maybe see it going towards the wrong things, or do you think that it is correctly managed, if the energy is correctly used, that it can change it for the good?
Well, the conflict, resparking the conflict is ongoing. It's low grade. People are still dying. There's no longer a war, but there's still a conflict that's ongoing. With young people mobilizing to bring about social change, it has that potential, you know, to escalate the conflict, especially if some of the rebel groups in the East are not in accord with the leadership that's in Kinshasa. They can, you know, it's a large country with very little infrastructure, so it's easy for any rebel group to destabilize different parts of the country. So that potential does exist. I mentioned Egypt and Tunisia, but young people are looking back in other African history as well, in South Africa. They're also looking into models in Latin America to see where Latin American countries are now managing their resources. Looking at Brazil. How's Brazil transformed its society in order to now benefit the people? Ecuador, Bolivia, these countries, young people are looking south as well.
Maybe Venezuela?
Ecuador, Venezuela, all those countries in Latin America that are now working in the interests of their population. Yes?
Sorry, there's so many questions, but this is actually two questions. So it seems very important that the key to Congo development is determining their own affairs, which is resisting foreign influence. And it seems like historically they have not been able to resist foreign influence because they are too weak. So how do you think this? Because young people do not really hold the power here. Like it is still, you know, it's still the older people who are actually the, you know, people who have power. So how do you think Congo can attain this strength to resist foreign influence? Because if you look at other like Latin American and Asian countries, the ones that have come out of colonialism successfully, they have very strong governments that block out foreign influence. But like Congo has not been able to do that. So how do you think this youth, you know, empowerment can translate into political strength on the international?
Why is Myanmar so weak?
Wow, is this it? Okay, before you all, I can answer that shortly afterwards. But before you all go, this is what I'd like for you to do. Please visit our site, congoweek.org. Also visit congojustice.org. And every October we have Congo Week, and that's a way for you to be engaged with us if you want to get more involved. You can also, I'm going to leave some documents for you here as well.
Thank you.
In order if you want to get more involved in the work that we're doing, okay?